open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
Well, the first debate of the primary campaign season was held last night. I'll give you some thoughts, some of my thoughts on that event coming up on today's Kentucky's Voice. Thanks for joining us here as we are here each weekday 11 to noon on 970 WGTK Live and streaming live across social media platforms. So you can hear us in any part of the world you're in, and then you can catch us on television this afternoon at 12:30, 4, and 8 on Channel 21 WBNA right here in the greater Louisville area. We cover about 28 counties here. If you're a business owner, you want to build your brand and expand your customer base and grow your business, get a hold of me today on our text line, 502-571-0970, and we'll get you set up to advertise your business here as part of this conservative, common-sense, Christian-based network right here, Kentucky's Voice. That's what you found today. And what you found last night was the first debate among the U.S. Senate primary contenders for the GOP last night. We'll give you some thoughts on that, as well as a new report showing tax reform is a winning strategy for Kentucky. And the Family Foundation has issued a bad gambling bill alert. We'll talk to David Walls, Executive Director of the Family Foundation of Kentucky, coming up here in a moment. But first, to no one's great surprise, Governor Andy Beshear has again stood with the educrats over the parents by vetoing House Bill 1, which opts Kentucky into the federal tax credit scholarship program created as part of President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill. In his veto message, Beshear tried to paint this bill as diverting public dollars for non-public education. He says with House Bill 1, the supermajority is at it again, wanting to use a federal tax credit to divert public dollars to private schools. No, Mr. Teacher Union and educrat-bought governor, there you go again. The fact is that this bill would not cost Kentucky taxpayers a dime, but it would provide help for students, scholarship for all students, public, private, homeschool, whatever their educational setting. It would provide them some resources to meet educational needs. It's about the students, sir, not the system. Here's how that will work, by the way, and I've gotten a lot of questions about how will this work. Well, here's how it will work. Both individuals and businesses will be able to contribute to what are called scholarship granting organizations. These are third-party, nonprofit organizations, and in return for donations, they will receive a dollar-for-dollar federal tax credit. Starting in 2027, donors will receive 100% credit on contributions up to $1,700 annually, which directly reduces federal tax liability, meaning these donations directly reduce the amount of federal income tax owed rather than just lowering taxable income like we've seen some of these tax credit scholarship programs across the country. But it's very important to understand that these donations are made to a third-party nonprofit organization. They're called scholarship granting organizations, who will then be responsible for dispersing these funds to students who qualify. Again, these could go, for example, for a disabled student in the public school system that might need certain services or therapies that their school doesn't provide. They could use a scholarship to provide those services. Perhaps a child from a lower income family is stuck in a failing school. They found a school that will work for them, and with a scholarship, they'll be able to afford the tuition. Or perhaps a homeschooling student who wants to take an advanced placement class in biology or physics because they want to pursue an engineering degree and their school system doesn't offer what they need. They'll be able to use these resources to get that class. The legislature here is all about focusing on the needs of students and families. The difference with the governor is he's focused on satisfying a key special interest in his presidential run. That is the teachers' unions and the educrats. It's that simple. And one other important point I want to reinforce now about this program: it will not cost Kentucky taxpayers a dime. Big debate here in Louisville last night. 3 leading candidates for the GOP nomination for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Mitch McConnell squared off. We'll get to that. But first, an urgent alert from the Family Foundation of Kentucky about a bill it says would unconstitutionally expand gambling here in the Commonwealth. David Walls is with us. Stay tuned.
Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you can join us today via text, the Kentucky's Voice text line at 502-571-0970. Love to hear your thoughts. If you caught the debate last night, get your comments in here. We'll look at those later. And we'll also hear a couple of clips from the debate, hopefully here to kind of show the contrast between these candidates who are seeking the GOP nomination for the seat currently held by Senator Mitch McConnell, and it's been held by him for 4 decades, basically. So it's going to be an important election and a big change. By the way, one other thing on the House Bill 1 that I did want to say is that if Kentucky does not opt into this One Big Beautiful Bill school choice program, then people in Kentucky taxpayers, will still be able to benefit from a federal tax credit scholarship program. It's just that their dollars will go to scholarship granting organizations in other states. So that means students in other states will benefit, people in other states will benefit from this program if we do not opt into it here. So hopefully the House has overridden the governor's veto. I assume the Senate will do it. And by the way, the greatest thing about that is I bring David Walls in here. He can comment on this real quick as well. And I know he's been supportive of this program. David Walls, Executive Director of the Family Foundation. My view is that the greatest thing about this House Bill 1 is that this governor can do absolutely nothing about it. He can't stop it. The teachers' unions can't stop it. The educrats can't stop it. And parents and families here will finally get something that our polling has said they believe in. Of course, the constitutional amendment went down, but that, getting a constitutional amendment passed, saying that's an indication of how people believe about this issue, I don't think that's right. Do you?
No. And I'll tell you that it's just been, frankly, embarrassing to see how the governor has been messaging and lying on this issue. Jim, as you know, and rightly pointed out, this is a win-win-win. This is a win for families and students, and this is a win for education. And not moving forward with this legislation, and obviously we have every reason to believe that the Senate's going to override the veto, and this will become law, and Kentucky will opt in. But not opting into this, as you said, Jim, that simply just means that the educrats and Governor Beshear apparently want Kentucky's taxpayers to be sending these dollars to support students outside of Kentucky instead of benefiting Kentucky students. So it really is a sad state to see where ideology trumps the good of Kentucky students. But unfortunately, we see that a lot from our governor.
Yeah, that's right. if what the governor says is true, that means that every dollar that Kentuckians get to keep because of a tax credit really doesn't belong to them, David Walls. It belongs to the government, and the fact that we're not sending it to the government means that the government can't survive and can't support the programs and services that it expects that people expect it to.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly excited that the General Assembly is moving forward on this, as a majority of states are, and I'm looking forward to see how this tax credit scholarship program is going to benefit Kentucky students. I think it's going to be a blessing for students in that are either homeschooled, private schooled, or public schools. Like I said, it's going to be a win all the way around.
Well, let's get to this alert that you sent out yesterday, David Walls, the Family Foundation, about a bill that's been filed in Frankfurt, House Bill 904. Have we had that many bills filed? Really, over 900 bills in this session. But this one, and you have to watch these bills filed, later in the session, because a lot of times politicians, I know this will be a shocker, but they try to sneak things through to satisfy some constituency or some special interest. And you can tell me if that's what's going on here, but I sort of smell that out here. Representative Michael Meredith of Brownsville has filed this bill, House Bill 904. And you're saying, and you're concerned about this bill because you say it'll expand gambling, because you say this will add fixed odds wagering to the pari-mutuel betting that is allowed. Kind of help. I was a little bit confused about that as well. Maybe you can help us understand the difference there and why this is of such concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, the Family Foundation, we've long opposed the expansion of predatory state-sponsored gambling, and that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about state-sponsored predatory gambling that unfortunately harms Kentuckians, and the social cost always outweigh any tax revenue. But what's happening here, Jim, is, to be clear, Section 226 of the Kentucky Constitution has long been understood as the foundational legal prohibition against essentially all forms of gambling in Kentucky, except for some exceptions that have moved forward, and some of those obviously via constitutional amendment. We have long had pari-mutuel wagering on horse betting, and that's where folks are pulled together and you're betting against one another, and the odds fluctuate. But specifically, you're not betting against the house. You're betting against that pool. That's essentially what pari-mutuel wagering is. Of course, we have charitable gaming, and then also the Kentucky State Lottery. And so the reality is, any expansion of any form of gambling outside of those three situations requires a constitutional amendment. We were involved for 10 years in a lawsuit against the Horse Racing Commission when they were unconstitutionally expanding really slot machines, these so-called historical horse racing machines that are really slot machines. We won that case 7-0 at the Kentucky Supreme Court. But what the gambling industry has done is they have essentially doubled down, lobbying, pushing the legislature to do via statute what is required to be done via the Constitution. And so we saw that in 2023 when the legislature passed sports betting. Again, that's something that would need to be done constitutionally. And now we've got House Bill 904. And to be clear, there are some good things in this bill, some things that we have supported and advocated for many years at the Family Foundation, including language to raise the gambling age from 18 to 21 for online sports betting, and some other protections in the bill. But those protections were in a standalone bill, House Bill 582 by Representative David Hale. And instead of moving that bill forward, and I believe it would have had bipartisan support, what they've done is they pulled some of those provisions into this 135-page monstrosity of a bill that is doing a variety of different things. Like I said, some good, some bad. But our concern continues to be when you're talking about legalizing so-called fixed odds wagering, and again, think of that as betting against the house, which
instead of betting against
absolutely
other bettors.
So that's really the distinction. Yeah. But the Kentucky Supreme Court, the Kentucky Constitution is clear. Pari-mutuel betting on horse races is legal. Anything extending beyond that is not, and our concern continues to be for conservatives, for those that value the Constitution, those that are constitutionalists. The gambling industry may want to take the easy road and just say, let's do these things statutorily because they can ram these things through. We just think that's the wrong approach. And we think anyone, even maybe if you don't share our same concerns against all forms of predatory state-sponsored gambling, from a constitutional standpoint, I think Kentuckians should have concern that we're continuing to see these massive bills being pushed.
Yep.
That are seeking to do via statute what needs to be done via amending the Constitution.
Okay, we're talking with David Walls, Executive Director of the Family Foundation of Kentucky. David, you think this too is a slippery slope toward standalone casinos. I know you mentioned that. How do you see that happening? And is this a case where people who want to push this through without having to take the route of a constitutional amendment are counting on maybe the momentum that the gambling industry feels like it's gotten here in the past few years to get to that point?
I think that's exactly what's going on, and we're also continuing to see kind of the monopolistic tendencies of all of this, obviously with Churchill Downs and others. This is really the gambling industry, more so than just the horse racing industry. And there's other concerns in this bill where they're essentially even fantasy sports now. They're throwing all of these things underneath the Horse Racing Commission, which is really controlled by gambling interest. And so there's just a lot of concerns. But Jim, I also just want to say we're also living in a moment now where we recognize, gambling addictions are on the rise at incredible levels. Research is showing gambling is addicted as opioids, heroin, cocaine. It has the highest suicide rate of any addiction. And as we sit here right now with the proliferation of sports betting, we are seeing that the top demographic that now is getting caught up in gambling addictions are young adults and even teens. Roughly 10% of U.S. men are showing signs of a gambling problem, and we've seen calls to the gambling hotline here in Kentucky double in the last couple of years. And so, once again, we just have grave concerns about where this industry is taking Kentucky, seeking to capitalize kind of on the momentum that they have to push these continued expansions forward. And my concern continues to be they haven't done it the proper way. And as they continue to, quote unquote, legalize all these fixed odds options,
right, that
is going to continue to open the door to the casino style gambling and things that ultimately we know this industry wants to have Kentucky. And look, if Kentucky wants to go down that path, Jim, we should have an opportunity to vote on it the proper way.
David Walls, Executive Director of the Family Foundation, you're wanting people to urge their state legislators to oppose House Bill 904 and other anti-constitutional legislation designed to expand government-sponsored gambling in Kentucky. Did I say that right?
You did, and folks can learn more and join us in taking action at KentuckyFamily.org.
Very good. Thank you, David. Keep up the great work, and don't be a stranger. We'll have you back. Have a great day. Stay with us. Kentucky's Voice.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
So are you concerned that we're moving down the path towards standalone casinos here in Kentucky, and that expanding gambling unconstitutionally just seems to maybe be accepted among significant number of our legislators? That should be of concern, I think. And whether you're supportive of more gambling or not, it should be done the right way. And I'd love to know what you think about that. 502-571-0970. You can text us there on the Kentucky's Voice text line. Again, that's 502-571-0970. And I want to mention this. The Hardin County Republican Party is going to have a debate on April 11th at 11 a.m. That's at ECTC there in Elizabethtown. And this will be a debate among the state senate, state representatives, sheriff, PVA, magisterial, and constable candidates. And there are at least two candidates in each of those for each of those seats. So it will be a competitive primary there. That's April 11th. That's a Republican primary debate for state senate, state rep, sheriff, magisterial, constable, PVA in those areas. And I know with property values being assessed at such a higher rate than previously, there's a lot more interest in the PVA races maybe than there were at one time. All right. The last night's debate with the three leading candidates for the Republican nomination for the seat currently held by longtime politician Mitch McConnell, who's announced he's not running for re-election, occurred at the Henry Clay Event Center here in downtown Louisville. The most heated moments came between Congressman Andy Barr and businessman Nate Morris over the issues of immigration and DEI. And this is a WDRB television here carried the debate last night, and we've got a couple of clips from that debate. First of all, here's one of the heated moments between Barr and Morris. Go.
The only person who supports foreign workers replacing Americans is Mr. Morris, who hired them to replace American workers, foreign workers, and he embraced a UN proposal to open our borders to illegal immigrants.
That's not true.
That was his corporate position. And by the way, he put the mayor of Philadelphia on his board.
1 second, gentlemen. We're not going to speak over each other.
A sanctuary city, and he put a mayor of a sanctuary city on his board.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Morris, you have 30 seconds. A buzzer will go off at 30 seconds, and your mic will be cut off.
Folks, how do you know when a career politician is lying? They're moving their lips. This is a guy who lies with every breath that he takes. This is a guy that continues to let so many illegals into our country, millions and millions of illegals. Folks, he said that we owe Afghani nationals, we owe it to them, and allowing them to come to our country. And we all saw the tragedy over Thanksgiving. It was because of the Afghani immigrants that were unvetted that he led into our country that caused that tragedy over Thanksgiving. Andy, you got blood on your hands, and it's so sad to hear and listen to you lie about your record.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Now each of these guys tried to differentiate themselves from the other. Morris attacked Cameron and Barr for being what he calls career politicians. Clip 2.
You see, I don't come from the political class. I didn't make my living in government like my opponents. I'm here as a businessman, as an outsider. I'm the son of a single mother. 19 of my family members worked in an auto plant right here in Kentucky building cars and trucks for Ford Motor Company. They would come home with grease on their hands after working double shifts, and they believed that if you're willing to work hard in this country, you can build something that matters. That's what helped build my company from scratch, creating thousands of jobs and providing free health care for every one of my employees. Folks, we know these career politicians have run our country off a cliff. We got to have people that are not owned by the big banks, the special interests, and especially not Mitch McConnell. I'm so proud that I was Charlie Kirk's final endorsement before he was taken from us. Charlie knew that we needed leaders with spines of steel that are willing to go to Washington and hit the political machine with everything they've got. And that's what I'll do.
But the highest priority of all is getting you-know-whose endorsement. Barr pointed to his record in Congress. Clip 3.
Now, this is very important. I'm the only candidate on this stage who is actually working with President Trump right now to deliver on this America First agenda. Together, we have passed historic tax cuts. We have secured the border after 4 years of a nightmare of open border policies from Joe Biden. We are rolling back regulations to lower the cost of living, to unleash American energy dominance and unleash our capital markets. We're restoring common sense to Washington, D.C. by standing up to the radical left and stopping the indoctrination of our children with DEI propaganda and stopping the defunding of the police. But there's more work to do. There's more work to be done. And so this is a golden opportunity, an opportunity with President Trump in the White House to finish the job, to save America, to stop socialism, to unleash the American dream through limited government, free enterprise, and a strong national defense.
Daniel Cameron is seeking the president's endorsement by differentiating him with his predecessor, Joe Biden. Go.
Well, let's take a stock of where we were. Under Joe Biden and President Obama, you had red lines and the disastrous evacuation from Afghanistan. President Trump is about decisive action on behalf of the American people to ensure our national security. I'm grateful for President Trump and would support his efforts in Iran. And also, let's look at what he did with Maduro in taking out a narco-terrorist in Venezuela. This president is on the right track, and I'm grateful for his leadership.
Okay, so it's telling that Donald Trump's name was mentioned way more last night than Mitch McConnell, the politician they're seeking to replace, the senator, of course, longtime senator and Senate Majority Leader. In fact, the candidates went overboard to distance themselves with from McConnell, with Morris and Barr each accusing the other of being beholden to the formerly powerful senator from Kentucky. Morris had a particularly biting line. He said Andy Morris just a year and a half ago called Mitch McConnell his mentor on television. Now, folks, he said, I don't know about you all, but I don't know many 50-year-old men that still have mentors. I mean, at that point in your life, you should be mentoring others. But this is a guy who's going to be just like Mitch when he gets up there. And yet Morris was asked about how he could call his opponents McConnell's boys when he himself interned for Senator McConnell. Morris never really did answer that question other than to say, oh, shucks, that was 26 years ago. And yeah, at one time, Mitch did some great things for our state, but now he's just too old. Just look at him. He went back to his nasty attacks on McConnell's fiscal condition and how he's basically just too old and decrepit to serve. All right. Some general observations about this debate, and I want to hear what your thoughts are. 502-571-0970. But first of all, the lighting on this set last night was just terrible. It was like a dark. I think it just was. I mean, I think WDRB is a fine outfit overall, but yesterday just wasn't one of their finest performances. In fact, it was not good at all in terms of the visual of this debate. The moderators, they said they were going to cut off mics, and yet they allowed Morris and Barr to continue to talk over each other without making good on that promise, and then even used the clip of the two interrupting each other later on their newscast. So it's like we really wanted them to talk over each other, even though we said we didn't. That's just how it appeared to me. And then finally, I think this might be the beginning of Daniel Cameron's comeback from his loss to Matt Bevin in the gubernatorial race a few years ago. Cameron just let Morris and Barr attack each other while he calmly but firmly made his case. And I think as this campaign goes on, Daniel Cameron should focus more and more on distinguishing himself from the two. The other thing that Cameron did is basically ask for a second chance after losing the gubernatorial race to Bevin, to Andy Beshear. And I said Bevin, but it's Andy Beshear who he lost to, of course. And it was following Bevin's. It was following Bevin's dropping out. But he also said his campaign will be a big tent. So this from our Kentucky's Voice text line, hopefully, and this is about, well, let's say no more Mitch or his connections. Okay, that's off about the debate. Another quick text from House Bill 1 about the school choice bill. Hopefully House Bill 1 will not provide language for teachers in over 100 different languages other than English spoken by students in Kentucky's public schools. Hiring more language teachers will be a burden on taxpayers. English is the language of the USA. And so I want to make sure I'm clear about the debate. Daniel Cameron lost to Andy Beshear, not Matt Bevin, a few years ago. But anyhow, he's on his comeback, I think. What do you think? 502-571-0970 is our Kentucky's Voice text line. Coming up, in the fight for freedom and prosperity, we must take new ground, but we must defend the ground we've taken and show how our good policies, sound policies, are working. Stay with us for Ray Hederman from the Buckeye Institute next.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Thanks for joining us today here on Kentucky's Voice and staying with us here as we go into the second part of this show today. We're here every weekday, 11 to noon, and you can catch us live here on 970 WGTK, where you're listening to this live right now, or you're watching as we stream live across our major social media platforms. You can also catch us on television this afternoon at 12:30 and 4, and tonight at 8 o'clock on WBNA right here in the greater Louisville area. Glad to have you with us. We're talking about debates and school choice, and also in the fight for freedom, there's always going to be somebody trying to take your freedom or your stuff. And that's why I think it's important that we defend the sound policies that we have passed here in Kentucky in the past few years, especially those related to tax reform. In 2018, the year after Republicans took control of the State House, they reduced the state's individual income tax rate from 6% to 5%. And then 3 years later, in 2021, the legislature passed a bill that begins the process of incrementally reducing the state's individual income tax rate with the goal of eliminating it altogether, just like our neighboring Indiana is doing, really following their path toward incremental reductions to make sure that revenues support these cuts. Now, and speaking of revenues, this legislation that was passed triggered 0.5% cuts in the rate, provided revenues had increased at least 1%. So twice the amount of the cut, plus the budget reserves have to contain at least 10% of general fund revenues. Opponents, of course, claim that such cuts will hurt the state, force budget cuts, result in insufficient revenue for needed programs. But a new report published by the Bluegrass Institute, and it can be found on the front page of their website at bluegrassinstitute.org, titled Continuing Kentucky Tax Reform Efforts, advocates for ongoing pro-growth tax reforms in our state to boost economic competitiveness, particularly against neighboring states with lower taxes. And joining me to discuss this report today is my friend and one of its authors, Ray Hederman, Executive Director of the Economic Research Center and Vice President of Policy at the Great Buckeye Institute over in neighboring Ohio. And Ray, it's great to have you with us today. You've researched the impact of our tax cuts and this movement from relying on income taxes to really revenue by consumption taxes. What'd you find out about the result that it's had on our state, our business climate, our prospects for future growth and prosperity? Has it been a positive one?
Yeah, Jim, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about Kentucky's continuing tax reform efforts. I mean, as you mentioned, Kentucky was really on the vanguard of state-led tax reform, back in 2018 when they started looking at moving to a flat tax, really taking an effort to lower those distortions in the tax code. What we do here at the Buckeye Institute is, I'm the director of our Economic Research Center, and we use peer-reviewed economic models to take a look at what really happens when you cut taxes. Because what a tax is, it's a discouragement on efforts to work more, invest more if it's an income tax, or obviously a tax on consumption can make you choose whether or not you're going to consume certain items. And look, this isn't rocket science. We know that policymakers use taxes as a way to try to control people's behavior, right? Taxes on cigarettes to discourage smoking, same thing that a tax on capital gains will do to discourage investment. So what we wanted to do at the Economic Research Center is use our dynamic macro model that we've had peer reviewed by academics to say, yes, you guys are using good methodology to look at Kentucky's tax reform efforts. And what we found that if Kentucky did not reduce its income tax to 3.5%, we found that Kentucky's economy would grow slower. But because this tax reform's efforts, the good news is Kentucky's gross domestic product, GDP, grows by over $500 million more this year. About 2,000 more jobs have been added, and about almost $260 million more in capital investment. Capital investment is businesses investing in themselves, adding more jobs, adding more goods, expanding their operations. And that's really the bulwark for economic growth. And without these tax reform efforts, I'm afraid, that Kentucky would be suffering an economic slowdown that we've seen in some competitor states like Illinois, for example, that's gone in the opposite direction. And I think the other thing to note, Jim, is, Kentuckians shouldn't sit on their laurels because, our state here up in Ohio, we've gone to a flat tax last year. We're aiming to get our rate down to 2.75% next year, which will be lower than Kentucky's rate. Mm-hmm. And because states compete against each other, Kentucky needs to look at going bolder with their tax reform. And I think they need to get down to 3% next year and go ahead and make sure that they meet the trigger that's needed to continue to drive the tax rate down even further.
Ray, that's true. And, what I like about this approach is it ties spending with the tax cut. So, for example, revenues have to be greater than what the tax cut would cost in static terms, I guess, even though that's a problem talking about that way in one sense because there's a dynamic aspect of that. But let's just, for the sake of this discussion, let's start there. Revenues have to be at least 1% growth in revenues, and the budget reserves have to be at least 10% of general revenues. So that's a motivation, is it not, for politicians to restrain spending, because there's a political benefit that comes with tax cuts. Talk about that a little bit. This is not and the reason I bring this up is opponents talk about those things as if they're exclusive. A lot of times they talk about spending as if it's exclusive from a tax cut, or growth as if it's exclusive from that. But the way that this is put together, I think it encourages restraint on spending. What do you think?
Yeah, Jim, it's important to know that policymakers, when they're cutting taxes, is putting money in the pocket of businesses and individuals that can do more to promote economic growth in the state government, right? Economists, including the head of President Barack Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, have looked at this. They found that government spending is simply not as productive as individuals and businesses spending that money. And so what policymakers, want to do, though, the unfortunate thing is politicians, can sometimes be incentivized for government spending because, they like the ribbon cutting ceremonies, because they think that that's a good way to get votes, and they can do that by handing out tax expenditures to businesses, or, ribbon cuttings before, new public infrastructure projects. But that's not the way to generate growth. And so it's important, that policymakers, recognize that constraint and say, look, we need to make sure that we're keeping the rainy day fund, keeping our emergency funds full, that we're not just cutting taxes, willy-nilly with no consequences. Because unlike the federal government, Jim, as you know, states must balance their budgets, right? And so if a state, cuts taxes too much, you can have a temporary shortfall that policymakers have to offset in other areas. So it's important, when you're looking at these tax reform efforts, that you recognize two things. One is taxes is one half the ledger. The other ledger is spending constraints, and policymakers need to resist that urge of spending more money of the taxpayers. The second thing is, you mentioned, static scores versus dynamic scores. And let's recognize that, look, tax cuts, when done well, like this cut in the income tax is, doesn't cost as much as a static model says it does, because better economic activity, more investment, people going out spending more because they have more money in their tax pockets, that generates additional tax revenues. So this makes it easier for the state like Kentucky to see tax revenues growing after a tax cut, because the economy is doing better, because people are spending, they're expanding their economic activity.
Yeah, it's and individuals know better, Ray, how to spend those dollars, and businesses. And that's a part of it too. It's not just that they have it to spend, but the way they spend it, the way they invest it, the decisions they make are they know better than government how to use these dollars. So the more that, and certainly government has to have a certain amount of funding for the services that, education, healthcare, and all that, prisons and safety. But sometimes I think we forget that these dollars belong to taxpayers, and they know how to spend these. And when we allow that to happen, then this dynamic growth takes place that can't really be predicted, because you don't know how much that's going to happen. So researchers are somewhat limited, aren't they, on what they can say even about the positive impact of a tax cut?
Well, Jim, we know that, we know from basic historical evidence, and common sense, if you look at the worldwide economies, right, lower tax states, lower tax countries produce more economic growth. So we can sit there and with this report, and we can take a look at it as a good researcher, we can say, yes, we think everything else being equal, right, which is, assuming there's no energy prices, because Kentucky is engaging in prudent tax policy, Kentucky's economy will be about $500 million larger than it would have been. What I can't tell you is, which of these businesses, are going to be doing better, where to invest your dollars. We don't have that type of granularity. But we know that when a state reduces that burden on individuals earning more money, they put more money in the pockets of these individuals. When they encourage businesses to go on and invest and expand, the economy is going to be bigger. We've seen that play out time and time again. And that's a reason, where businesses have been and people have been moving towards low tax pro-growth states here in the United States.
Well, Ray Hederman, who is the executive director of the Economic Research Center, vice president of policy at the Buckeye Institute, thank you for coming on with us today. Thanks for the information. You've packed a lot of great information in this segment, and we appreciate your coming on and the work you've done. And we'll have you back sometime. Stay in touch, and we'll have you back to follow the progress of our tax reform here in Kentucky. Thanks for joining us.
Great, Jim. Always a pleasure to be here. Look forward to coming back. And, I think it's important that our two states continue to back on competitive, good tax policy.
Thank you, sir. Stay with us. One more segment today. We'll get to your text off the Kentucky's Voice text line. Coming up. Don't go away.
Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Thanks for joining us today here on Kentucky's Voice. We're here each weekday, 11 to noon, and on TV. Catch us on television this afternoon, 12:30, 4, and 8. And I'd love to hear from you. You can text us on the Kentucky's Voice text line at 502-571-0970, or you can support us with a one-time or monthly gift by texting KY Voice to 53555. And, of course, you can hear us stream live across social media each weekday as well. Some more reaction from last night's debate from the three U.S. Senate GOP candidates. This off our Kentucky's Voice text line. Daniel Cameron got less time than the other two candidates. Whoever was in charge of lighting should be fired. No questions on filibusters. WDRB did a lousy job on questions. I also saw some other comments about this on some on social media responses to the debate. And there was also a point made that, and it was made by our own Andrew Cooperrider, who I'm sure is going to have some more of his analysis on the debate on his show here tomorrow. He'll be here at the same time, 11 to noon. He'll be hosting. But he brought up an important point that I think is worth mentioning, and that is that the host didn't seem to really understand conservative issues. They didn't understand that here you have three candidates that are fighting for the Republican nomination. This is not a general election. This is a primary election. So it's more partisan. It's right and left, and that the questioners did not understand many of the issues and didn't do a very good job, honestly. And I tend to go a little bit further with my fellow reporters and journalists, but this was just not up to par last night as far as the quality of this goes, and the lighting was terrible for this. So anyhow, it's television, it's visual. So you gotta pay attention to this stuff. And now this point about Cameron getting less time, in a sense, that's true. I didn't really, I didn't check the minutes, but I think really Daniel Cameron made the most of the time he had, maybe more than anybody else. I think he made the most of that because he got asked about his loss to Andy Bashir in the gubernatorial race a few years ago. And he said, hey, he was open about it. He said, hey, Kentuckians give people a second chance, and I'm asking for another chance. I thought that really showed great humility. I thought it showed great awareness of the concerns that people have and addressing those concerns directly. On the other hand, Nate Morse did not answer the question about interning for Mitch McConnell and whether, why that shouldn't be an issue. So, and then there were also some DEI things that I thought Morris would be more sharpened on in terms of his responses. But he needs to sharpen his responses in terms of making the point quickly and getting there instead of leaving room for doubt, which he did. I don't think there is doubt in his mind, but certainly the optics of that, when you're asked a question directly like that, have a better answer ready. Have it ready, prepared. Be prepared to answer the question. So practice your answer and prepare it, and practice and prepare and practice and prepare. You can't do too much of that. Andy Barr, in my view, should drink decaf the day of the debates. He was wound up to the point where his thoughts were ahead of his speech and his speaking. So you got to match those two. Your articulation has to keep up with your thoughts, and that can be a difficult thing when you're ready to go. You're passionate, and certainly he is, and I think that's a positive for him. And Nate Morris did, I think, the best job he did all night was of differentiating his background as a businessman, as an outsider, if you will, is how he presented it. Although he's got some problems with that, having interned for Mitch McConnell. So I don't know how he's going to navigate all of that. But for the most part, he did, I think, a good job of differentiating himself as an outsider versus the other two candidates who have been in government. And look, folks, I'm not saying that's necessarily good or bad thing. I think Ronald Reagan served much of his lifetime in government, although he also was in Hollywood and did work there, but as an actor, but served a lot of his life in politics. But you can do a lot of good. But I do think there is concern that after people have been in Washington for so long, that something happens to them. Pardon me. Something happens to them, and we've seen that, especially in Washington, somewhat in Frankfurt as well. People get up there and they get in that bubble. Not so much here, though, because legislators are going to see the folks that they need votes from, at the grocery store on Saturday, at church on Sunday, their kids' outings at the school, at the ball games. So they're going to be accountable for that. But when you get up there in Washington, far away from Main Street here in Kentucky, there's a concern that something happens. Now, one other observation that I have is that Nate Morris said that he would only serve 2 terms if elected. Now, we've heard this before from Congressman, one that comes to mind, Congressman Ron Lewis, who said he would only serve a limited amount of time and then stayed way beyond that. We've heard Rand Paul talk about term limits. He's, of course, has stayed for quite a while up there in Washington. So I think there's reason to be skeptical of these promises about term limits, about, hey, I'll only stay a couple of terms. I would love to see that actually happen. I think that could have a big impact on the trust that people have in government here in our state, especially in the federal government. I think it was what the founders intended, and I think that Nate Morris made that point, that the founders never meant for people to go to Washington and make a career out of government, make a career in being on the public dole. There's 2 schools of thought on that. Certainly, you have to have people there who understand how it works in order to even change it, much less work within the system and make it work for Kentucky. So there's that balance. But you also need to have people who have enough of an outsider mentality that they will challenge the status quo and not be so worried about their next election, but they'll do the right thing, whatever the right thing is, at the time that's needed. And if they're not reelected because of it, so be it. Now, that's we hear that kind of talk, but we see very little of that actual statesmanship. And that's what that is. Hey, I'll do the right thing, even if I have to fall on my own political sword to do it. And I wonder if that may be a secret to making Washington work better for the country, making our government work better, increasing the trust in government. It's very low right now, especially in Congress. The trust in Congress. I wonder if this would make a difference if we had people that said, I'm going to do what our founders intended, go serve, and then I'm going to come back home and I'm going to live under the same laws and rules that we passed and implemented on others. So what do you think? Who won the debate in your view? Who did the best? I think Daniel Cameron really needed to have a good night, and I think he did. And I think Dave Morris had a better night than he had at Fancy Farm. I thought Andy Barr really shined at Fancy Farm. I thought last night was not quite as good, but I don't think it would hurt him that necessarily in this race. This is the first debate. We'll see how the other debates come along, and we'll be following those and give our feedback on those. But anyhow, I'd love to hear what you think as well. What you think matters to us, what you have to say. You're part of Kentucky's Voice, and voice means you say it. So you can say that here by texting us at 502-571-0970. Kentucky's Voice text line 502-571-0970. If you saw the debate, get a text in here. We've got a couple of minutes. We'll try to get those on here before the show is up for today, and we'll get back to them tomorrow, maybe, if not. Now, I want to go back for a moment to House Bill 1, the school choice bill, and I want to make that point again, that the Senate needs to pass the veto override, and I believe they will. And once they do, there will be nothing that anybody can do in terms of the teachers' unions or the governor to stop school choice from happening in Kentucky. Now, there's going to be a process of setting up scholarship granting organizations, of getting parents and families educated about that. So the work, there's going to be a lot of work to do on this. But I'm confident that we'll do that. And I've been involved in this fight for 2 decades now in our state. So I think this is a win for Kentucky's families. And we just need to get lots of people taking advantage of this once the state has opted into the one big, beautiful bill. Let me say this about President Trump. He is by far the most pro-school choice president that we've had in terms of his policy, in terms of people that he's put in key places. And I'm thankful for the president's work on this today, his administration's work on this bill, and for the legislators who have taken a stand and said yes, both in Washington and here. Thankful for Representative Kim Moser, who was a primary sponsor on this bill, Representative T.J. Roberts, who also did a lot of work on this bill, and all of those who co-sponsored. I don't have them in front of me, but you know who you are, and we appreciate it, and it's really important. What matters most is how Kentucky's families are going to benefit from this. And then on to the tax reform conversation that we had. And let me say this about the importance of our tax reform effort here, that a big part of this is that it requires that we have a strong budget reserve trust fund. So this is not a case where we're going to have tax cuts that cannot be supported, that we cannot afford. Because basically the trigger is set up so if we cannot afford a tax cut, it will not be triggered. We will not have a tax cut. So when we have had tax cuts, and we've reduced those rates several times in the past few years, that means our revenue situation is strong. That means our budget reserves are strong. But there's this disconnect between the growth that our state has accomplished, and the governor's out talking about the record economic growth during his administration, and yet he is the one who opposed many of these policies. He actually vetoed the original tax reform bill. One quick off of our text line, can you designate who gets the scholarships, or does it just go into a pool? Who gets these are students who qualify. Parents who qualify, there will be qualifications that need to be met in terms of income. If those qualifications are met, those kids will get a scholarship, whether they're public, private, or homeschool. Thanks for joining us today here on Kentucky's Voice. Have a great day, everyone. Join us again tomorrow, 11 o'clock. Andrew Cooper Ryder will be here. Don't miss it.